All right, Twitter poll of the week. Uh, this is where Matthew and I guess, are going to spend our time talking about Florida State. If you are not already tired of it, but the poll this week, you can find it each week at nachos_analysis. The question was, what does Florida State getting left out of the college football playoff mean to you? There were four options. The first one, I don't care. Second one, I feel for Florida State, but third option, they are one of the best teams. Then the final option was just the SEC money symbol and the ESPN effect. So before we reveal results, we'll get to a couple listener responses. ACC Jim says, glad they didn't make it in. Southern Rivals Football Show gets in and says, no doubt the ratings and revenue was probably the leading factor in those talks. Jay Markham says, means that the CFP got it right. And then Peter Marvin gets in and says, I see what the committee was doing. FSU with Rodemaker or QB3 would not make a great game, and they are looking for three great games, especially after Cincinnati or TCU. I don't like it for the players of FSU, but that's what they are thinking. Um, Before we reveal the listener notes, Matthew, what's your thoughts on this?
So I'm kind of voting for I feel for FSU, but I also think they're deserving of being among the best. Because I've already mentioned it, this puts the ACC in the Group of Five convo now. We're no longer Power Five. Um, this I'm just thinking back to a time where 2016 we lost to Pitt, barely beat Troy. We were fully healthy for those games. If we were left out of the playoffs for those hiccups, then we wouldn't have won that national championship. And then 2018, Trevor goes down against Syracuse, and we're obviously not the same team. We are run heavy, just pounding the ball, trying to get every yard that we can. Just like FSU, we were a different team with the starting quarterback out. If we didn't, going into that 2018 playoff too, everyone thought Clemson was going to get boat race. Clemson was the team that was the fraud in that playoffs. And what if the committee had decided to leave out a 13-0 freshman quarterback led team who came off the bench? He didn't start the season, if you remember. Uh, if the committee just decided that that team couldn't compete and they never even got the chance to show it. So I think it's bad for college football when the committee tries to predict how the games are going to go, because it's not always going to go how you think it is. And obviously, there's been blowouts in the playoffs before. Like, it happens every year, pretty much. I don't think there's been a year of the college football playoff where there hasn't been a blowout at any point in the playoffs. Like, I mean, people bring up the TCU note also about last year, but people forget that TCU won a playoff game last year, and it's not like the entire playoff field wasn't going to get blown out by Georgia that year. Georgia was just the best team last year. So, uh, I think it's bad for college football as a whole to leave out a 13-0 Power 5 conference champion, but I mean, I understand the case, but I think it's bad to start trying to predict games before they happen, because otherwise we might as well not even play them.
I'm going to push back on your point of the examples where Clemson struggled before, because in each of those examples, that was early in the season or midway point to the season, and specifically the Syracuse game, Trevor Lawrence was back the next week. He didn't suffer a season-ending injury, and you can go back and look at most of these teams, especially Alabama. They've had those games throughout this season. The game you mentioned earlier in the episode, I think that first of all, I also went with I feel for FSU, but as my response, because I feel bad for those players, because you checked the box, you did everything you were supposed to, you beat every team you faced, you won a conference championship. I'm honestly surprised that we've gotten was it 8, 9, 10 years into this college football playoff format, and something like this has not happened yet. But the final year, it happens. Um, I just don't. Florida State had a chance to prove themselves to whether they should be in the college football playoff the last 2 weeks, Florida and Louisville, and they have absolutely zero offense without Jordan Travis being in there. You can rely heavily on your defense like they did in the ACC championship, but against some of these teams that are in the playoff, the defense is not gonna keep you in the game for very long. So I think that the committee got it right. I was expecting Alabama to get left out from the time that I saw that game the other night. I told my parents this the next morning, and they kind of laughed at me. I'm like, watch, Alabama is going to get in, and Florida State's not. I feel for the Florida State players. I don't feel for the Florida State fans. That's our in conference rival. The way Mike Norvell handled the whole situation a couple years ago during COVID. I don't have any sympathy in general for Florida State, but I do feel bad, especially for Jordan Travis. I don't know if you saw his tweet. He basically said, "I wish I would have got hurt earlier in the season." Kind of sounds like he's putting the blame on himself there, but I think that because the goal of the committee is to get the four best teams in, and while Florida State checked every box in the current state of this Florida State football team, they're not one of the four best. I would argue that they're probably not even one of the 10 best teams in the country without Jordan Travis. So I think they got it right. I don't know. So I guess that's where we differ.
We'll see. I that's the biggest point of contention I have with this is because I do feel bad for the Florida State players. Like, if you think about how this current roster of Florida State was assembled, like a lot of people transferred in, a lot of people had to buy into Mike Norvell's mission, bringing Florida State back from the depths to where they're supposed to be. And, you do everything you're supposed to do, and then somebody from outside says, one person on your team got hurt, you're not good enough. But like everybody else, there's 100 other people on that team, and they're talented still without Jordan Travis. But I didn't watch much of the Florida game. I know it was a rough offensive performance for them, nor did I watch much of the ACC championship game, and that was another rough offensive performance. So, I understand that point, but I don't like that it was tried to, or it was they attempted to predict how the playoffs were going to go before letting it happen. Like, if a team has the resume, I think you have to let them go in and prove that they don't belong there, like Cincinnati did, and like TCU did against UGA, like Notre Dame did against Clemson. Like, all those teams had the resume to get in, and I think they all deserve to be there no matter the outcome of the game. Like, those players worked hard for that, and it was taken away by something they couldn't control.
I agree with you. Florida State is definitely one of the four most deserving teams to get in there, but they're not one of the four best. And I think and they use, I mean, within the rules of the committee, one of the things you can factor in is significant injuries and that kind of thing. And you haven't really seen that rule come into play as far as whether a team got in a playoff or not. But they were able to use that to justify keeping them out this year. And my biggest thing, all these like tin hat wearing people on Twitter with all the conspiracy. I don't know where you lie with all this, Matthew, but the SEC conspiracies, the money conspiracies, all of that, I, I don't buy it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised though if within the conversation inside the committee walls, like numbers and playoff, like projections and TV numbers were in the conversation. Like, I wouldn't doubt that they talked about that. And
Well,
go ahead.
Well, those numbers don't back up getting SEC teams in there. The least watched national championship was Georgia Alabama. The
Conference
most
championship.
watched, no, a national championship. That was the least watched national championship when
Oh, and
Georgia and Alabama
27
faced each
was
other.
like 2017 something? 2019? No,
It was either, it was either
2020.
17 or 19, but that was the least watched national championship in the college football playoff era. The most watched had double. I think it was like 34 million watched Ohio State, Oregon, whereas like 17 million watched Alabama and Georgia. With the current playoff model you have right now, with teams that are literally spread out across the entire country, Michigan in the Midwest, Alabama in the Deep South, Texas, and Washington, I would imagine that viewership numbers are going to be one of the highest that it's ever been in this. So as far as like numbers and TV money goes, I don't, that's just not the case.
But I mean, you could say that that came into consideration by like instead by leaving Florida State out, like you're still getting your southern numbers with having Alabama in there, but you're also including Texas and I mean not saying that I'm not gonna say that Washington and Michigan didn't deserve to be in. Those are the two locks. But
Mm-hmm.
I think I mean I thought Florida State on Saturday night I thought Florida State was a lock because I was sitting there talking with my Georgia friends and like I didn't see how they could leave Florida State out with what they did this season. So I mean none of their wins are high quality necessarily. You got the Clemson win, which we didn't look great at that point in the season, but we looked great against them, and ended up becoming a better team later on. And then they have like a win against LSU, who was okay. I don't think like that's a super quality win. And then like Florida State, or I mean Florida and Louisville, that makes a little more sense to me. But back to the TV number thing, yeah, I don't think it's like a whole conspiracy thing. Like, but the ESPN does have exclusive TV rights now with the SEC, so I think like they're going to try to promote that as much as possible. And leaving the SEC out of the playoff entirely was like never in the question.
My thing is though, and obviously there's not minutes kept on these deliberations and meetings and that kind of stuff. I don't know how a playoff committee could even have that conversation when you're trying to decide that should not come into play, nor do I think it's coming into play. Like you're trying to talk about a game occurring on a football field. Whoever the chair is, which I believe is the gentleman from NC State, but I, I just don't know how that conversation could happen in one of these group meetings and be a valid reason to discuss some of this stuff. I don't know. I think that I think Florida State from viewership numbers would be better being in than Alabama. Going back to my comment about the ACC championship and how there was just a different vibe in the air with these teams that hadn't been there in a while. Um, Alabama's been there, done that. Obviously, their fans are dedicated and are going to watch the national championship. But from a national perspective, um, I think that general football fans would much rather see Florida State in there. So I just I don't see the benefit of having Alabama in there and that being the reason Alabama is in there. I think that Alabama is in there because they deserve to be in there.
Yeah, the only thing that makes me not think Alabama deserves to be there is the loss to Texas. Like we've already seen that matchup throughout the year, like during the season, and it did not go well for Alabama on a not even on a neutral site. Like it was at home for Alabama. So like that's one big loss. Like it was to a quality opponent, but they weren't even close in that game. And uh I don't know. I just don't know if their season I think their season resume matches with Florida State's. So like I said, I understand. I think the matchups made in this year's playoffs are maybe the best of the entire 14 playoff. but I'm still upset mostly for the Florida State players, I guess is where I'll stand.
I agree with you about um, the Alabama strength of schedule and their resume and that kind of thing. However, I would like to get your thought on this. If Alabama beats Michigan and Texas beats Washington and they face each other in the national championship, who do you think's favored in that game?
I think Texas goes in favored by Vegas, but it's going to be closer than the regular season because Alabama is in a completely different place than their team was back then. But I still think Texas will be favored because they've proved it on the field already.
I don't know. I think Alabama would be favored in that scenario, but and I don't know. I think that would be a interesting matchup to finish the season, especially the way I can't remember the spread, but I'm sure Alabama was favored in that regular season game, and then to lose at home by double digits to Texas, um, a rematch would be interesting. So, all right, let's look at the actual Twitter results. Again, thank you to everybody who got in and voted. So the votes went this way. Um, the least voted on option with 2% of the vote is Florida State is one of the best teams. I agree. Florida State is not one of the best teams. Only 2% of the vote there. Third most votes was I don't care. You got a lot of people that are kind of indifferent. 14% of the vote there. Um, I feel for FSU, but that was the vote that Matthew and I each had, 26%. And the winner, those people that wear the 10 hats that are convinced there's a conspiracy with the SEC and money and ESPN, won the vote with 58% of the vote. So our Twitter polls are dwindling as the season does. So thank you to everybody who's participated all season long. And if you haven't participated yet, get in, cast your vote, and leave us a comment, and we might read it on air.